How to increase SWE salaries in Europe. It is often mentioned that software engineer salaries in Europe are significantly lower compared to US salaries, even adjusting for lower cost of living. The consensus on why that is seems to be: individual contributors in Europe are not as valued as much as managerial professions, due to cultural/historical reasons. Salaries in the US are skewed due to the presence of FAANG companies and VC money, which inflates salaries through the large amount of capital they inject in the system. Europe has less freedom of enterprise, debatable, is in general more risk-averse, and has a less dynamic job market, more difficult to fire lower performers, which results in lower wages to compensate for these factors. Reasons aside, how can the European tech job market become more competitive? I got my higher education for free. I expect to save nothing for my children or their education. I expect to have to put aside very little for retirement. The thing is, I just can't find an argument why I should be able to get very rich doing my job. It's a comfortable job. It pays a good salary. I got here by taking no risk at all. I wouldn't want to switch jobs just to drive up my pay even if I could. I have other things to think about. I have worked 20 years in the same job and so have my colleagues. This is a cultural difference I feel. A lot of folks here are calling out the lower pay for SWEs in Europe and Canada as a failure, but also praise the low wealth inequality and low income inequality in Europe and Canada. You can't have low inequality by definition if you decide to start paying one group a ton of money. Well, this is a lot like the housing conversation in the US. I want my house to go up in value, and be a great investment. Also, why can't I afford a house? You can't have your cake and eat it too. It's not necessarily a failure, it's just a different place to draw the line on social contract. While individual contributors earn less, the social safety net also makes it much easier to found and grow a business without the threat of death and guarantees a peaceable minimum standard of living. It's also worth pointing out that salary, especially at high seniority levels, becomes a smaller and smaller part of total compensation. That does sound like a pretty stress-free way to live. That said, living in Europe doesn't always equal good living conditions and stability. It depends on the particular country you're in as well. My net salary is just over €1,000 per month as a software dev. My living expenses eat up around half of that. If a quick search turns up that in USA the median salary for a dev is around $100K per year, that means that I'd need anywhere from 8 to 14 years to save as much as they could in a year, depending on their disposable income, taxes, currency value, etc. In short, I'd much prefer not to spend a decade to get to the point where I'm as financially stable who's worked for a year, if even that. People oftentimes mention purchasing power parity, but it breaks down in a global economy. For example, I cannot afford AWS and most SaaS/PaaS tools. That's just one of the reasons why one could look for a better financial situation. Compound interest and investments in general could be another. Stability and peace of mind, although not guaranteed, could be a third. I graduated with 2 bachelor's degrees and a master's degree with no debt through scholarships and grants. I have saved nothing for my children's education. If they want to attend college, it is on them to pay their way just as it was for me. I've told them that I will help a bit during their first year. My company matches my retirement savings up to 5%. I save nothing else for retirement. I should have millions of dollars in my retirement fund by the time I retire. I already have over $1 million. That plus Social Security should take care of my retirement. I have a very comfortable job. I live about a 15-minute leisurely bike ride from campus. I work 20 to 30 hours a week. My company doesn't track my hours, and as long as I get me assignments done, everyone is happy. I can take up to 6 weeks of vacation a year plus 10 more fixed holidays that everyone gets. My health benefits are frankly amazing and cheap. On top of all of that, I receive a very healthy 6-figure salary. There are many hundreds of developers at my company that are similarly blessed. My point is that it is possible to receive a very good salary while still receiving many of the benefits you claim. Greater than I got here by taking no risk at all. This is the most European thing I've ever heard. Most people would not like to take risks and would not even think about stepping outside of their comfort zone. Personally, I think this is the reason why there are less startups in Europe compared to US. No one would like to take a risk unless it's absolutely necessary. Greater than I have worked 20 years in the same job, and so have my colleagues. I do not mean to be offensive, and I know everyone has their own cup of tea. But 20 years doing the job? This would literally be death to me personally as a software engineer. Changing your job is part of your career growth in order to expose yourself to new challenges, problems and new environments. Of course this comes with a risk factor, and personally, This risk and excitement is what makes life interesting. I would kill myself if I got stuck in the same job for 20 years. I have come to the same realization. I would rather have a better quality of life than I had in US than to get tons of dollar and live off in a gated community. Great public transport, healthcare, schools, world-class unis, top-notch research institutes, and great cultural institutes. The Gemeinschaft approach works here because you need to contribute back to the society in order to reap its benefits. Getting very rich allows me to cook less, do less chores and build up my skill further, get better, or to pursue passions that do not pay well. I calculated moving to Europe as a SWE would lead to a drastic lifestyle change for me, even with retirement, healthcare and children's education considered. With 2 children, Europe wins at 3 hands down. Greater than I wouldn't want to switch jobs just to drive up my pay even if I could. I have worked 20 years in the same job and so have my colleagues. Honestly, this part of the European mentality is hard for an outsider to understand. I lived there for 10 years and heard this argument countless times. I want a fulfilling life and part of that is a fulfilling job. It's hard to believe a job on the same company can be fulfilling for 20 plus years. Changing jobs is part of professional growth. Different strokes for different folks, I guess. I agree, it's basically risk-free here with paid education and the social safety net. I'm also from Germany. There is significant wealth inequality, but making your 40-60k pre-tax a year is very attainable for most developers here. In Switzerland, it's even higher, you're 60-70k plus, and they have to pay fewer taxes, with a higher cost of living. But the average life in Germany for a developer is very good. About 4 to 5 weeks of vacation every year, no expectations of working more than 9 to 5, at the average employer, and after 1 year working at a job you're eligible for unemployment insurance, which means you get 60% of your net salary for 1 year if you're unemployed. With regards to attaining riches, you can live comfortably with your 2,000/month net as a single, and easily with your 3-4k with 2 incomes and 2 small kids in a smaller city. So for most people, it's possible to save €500+/month, most don't. Because of lifestyle inflation, but that's a different matter. With side hustles, small freelance work, you can easily save your €501,000/month, which means that after 5 to 7 years you are able to save €80,000. Continuously investing in stocks, pension plans and ETFs, what most Germans also don't do, means that you can accumulate €500,000 by the age of 45 to 50. And this is the average developer, no 10x rockstar. Having a net worth of €700k to €1,000,000 when you're 67 years old with a very good work-life balance is nothing to be ashamed of. With more ambition, you can freelance for your 75/H, which translates to a 6-figure income. With that, it's possible to build a net worth of 2 to 3 million over 20 to 30 years. For people who want to be a millionaire in 10 to 15 years, this is not very attractive. But when you consider the work-life balance and the labor rights, it's easy to see how people would choose that. For high achievers, I would also recommend working in the US or Switzerland. But for average developers, it's not that bad of a deal. I honestly think this is a completely wrong-headed way of looking at things. You are paid what you're paid not because the company is determining what is fair given all of your circumstances, but rather the minimum they feel they can get away with. Nearly all employees would accept more pay if they were offered it, nearly all employers would pay less if they could, so like any market it is always an equilibrium between the two. And frankly in some job markets the salary is negotiated better than others. There is a sort of learned helplessness to I don't deserve more for this job etc. in the eternal words of Unforgiven, deserve's got nothing to do with it. It all boils down to what you want in your life. I've seen people, including myself, trying to change the lifestyle, thus money is a vehicle to do so and to build something with. Not everybody has got rich parents or sugar daddies, some people start from nearly zero and try to climb the social ladder. A higher salary can unlock multiple benefits, in terms of long-term economical security, e.g., in case of market crash and companies go bankrupt, berserk mode, laying people off, and maybe buy yourself a house/apartment. Plus, saving for children's future is one of the best gift a parent can do. Coming to an end, having a salary which is similar to what in SF are offered would be really good. Right, if you don't value your work, why would anybody else? I see this opinion a lot and I do take it personally. I come from a worker's family and getting into IT was hard. I still pay off a small 10k debt from university. It took me years to get into the industry, working for very little pay. All the while I didn't do anything for my pension. Now I have a good income, but income alone is not enough to buy a house near the city. Having a migration background in Germany might not have helped. Do you really think engineers, bankers, administration, lawyers, Teachers and real estate agents have it worse? In an industry that's created to destroy jobs, why would I work for less? Greater than. I just can't find an argument why I should be able to get very rich doing my job. Another way to think about this is that your job generates certain value in the economy. If labor's salary doesn't capture that, then that value is going somewhere, either to your governments via taxes or to capital owners. I understand that some Europeans will not have problems with the former, but are you comfortable letting capital class capture all the remaining value after taxes? If not, that is a good enough argument, because allowing that to happen is what is driving wealth inequality to high levels. Greater than. I got my higher education for free. I expect to save nothing for my children or their education. I expect to have to put aside very little for retirement. Exactly this. European social democracy allows people to have relatively calm life without burden to start their careers with huge school debt. Or worrying about health insurances. Once you will have family, you will see that not saving for their health insurances and school also helps a lot, and I wouldn't change this for USA system. On the other side, it is very simple for software engineer to get a job anywhere in the world, but do take into account pros and cons. Anyway, to the topic, the way of raising salaries in any sector has always been the same. Form a syndicate, get enough people to join and go on strike, and if you live in EU you are very well covered and protected regarding syndicate activities. Greater than. I have worked 20 years in the same job, and so have my colleagues. This is a cultural difference, I feel. I think this is part of your company's culture, not your society's culture. There are also lots of Dunder Mifflin type companies in America where nobody has any ambition and everyone just coasts until retirement. Greater than. The thing is, I just can't find an argument why I should be able to get very rich doing my job. Sure, but if you are a really good engineer in software, someone is going to get very rich from your work. Why not? Partly, you? I can understand this for oneself. But to be this complacent/indifferent to your kid's future is just kind of amusing to me. I haven't got billionaire status ambitions, but I also don't want my elder years to be effectively dictated by the vicissitudes of the political environment. Greater than. I expect to save nothing for my children or their education. I expect to have to put aside very little for retirement. In the UK, at least, I'm not sure this is still true. On retirement, I'm planning on getting nothing from the government once I get there, and it's looking increasingly likely that I won't be allowed to retire until slightly later in life. That being said, I have paid off my student loans in less than 10 years of work, so I can't complain about the cost and quality of education. What happens when the government doesn't have enough money to pay for retirement anymore? The system works well when you have growing workforce and productivity. It doesn't work with growing number of retirees and shrinking active workforce. Exactly. A company I know well had to lay off people in France and in the US. People in France keep almost their full wages for a whole year, and the medical insurance for free for a year. I hope the ones in the US find a job quickly and that their higher salary can cover any medical cost in the meantime. I would not be so sure. Lower wages for this amount of security seems a great deal to me. It sounds like one of these American stereotypes that quite often turns out to be true. That everyone should aim to be super stinking rich, or everyone is living in the gutter, but there's no in between. Unis are telling people that they can be the next Zuckerberg or Bezos, instead of telling them that they can earn well enough to have a very comfortable lifestyle for the rest of their lives. What you're describing reminds me of something Bob Metcalfe wrote years ago, but I'm afraid I don't care enough to find the original. That is, people obsessing over getting their taxes lowered are dummies, because companies will pay positions to a particular level in the social context of their employees. If a job, such as software developer, is supposed by employees to be upper middle class, that's what a company will pay in California, or India, or Germany, or wherever. Tax rates, housing costs, what have you, will be factored into that. Hence, within the US, we immediately see companies expecting to pay remote, outside SF employees less. In a similar vein, you're describing a lower headline salary buying a comparable standard of living because you aren't paying a mortgage equivalent sum for healthcare and education. I'm kind of surprised by the idea of saving nothing for your children. Is it a symptom of the dog-eat-dog American system of capitalism that it seems kinda wild to me? I guess if you can be certain that their fundamental needs will be met, it isn't as important. But in the US your life can be pretty crap, even if not abject developing world-style poverty. I get it, and I would completely agree if the salary gap was the same for managers, HR, etc. So the question is, why are managers, HR, etc. paid so much more than SWE in Europe? They bring less value to the company. Risk is only one reason to potentially be worth a high amount of money. Others are having connections that result in value for a company, and having a scarce skill so you can do something valuable for a company. SWE falls under the latter, for the companies that can leverage them highly enough. That is a completely wrong perspective, and might be symptomatic. You are not paid according to some argument that you personally deserve to be rich, you should be paid according to the value you produce in your context. And the relevant context is more and more global. I agree, what for? I would rather reduce the wages of those richer than SWEs by taxing them more and using that to reduce housing prices, increase wages of health workers and educational staff, and pay for more social programs to get the poor out of their misery. Optimally, it's my firm belief that we should be working towards UB to reduce bullshit jobs everywhere. I want people to be able to work on things that matter and things they care about, while living in a place they care about and for without having to constantly sweat about money. If European SWEs wanted to raise their wages, we would have to unionize and demand a greater share of revenue. Also, we would have to vote for politicians that want to force large companies to pay their fair share in taxes. Google, Amazon, Apple and others have a leg up because they can make billions without paying our countries their due taxes. I don't get why I would get a smaller cut of the profit just because I save less for my children than Americans do. I should be paid what is reasonable for the work I do, not how much money I spent on education. I don't think you've fully thought through your position. You making less isn't some altruistic thing. You making less directly contributes to your, already likely wealthy, boss making more. It's not like you making less means the poor live better lives, it's essentially donating money to your employer. As a software engineer, your leverage should be higher than near any other profession. This is why SV engineers are paid handsomely. Your productive output eclipses that of any profession without force multipliers. Your income should not be based on input, risk, comfort, but rather your output, scale, value. I live in Germany and don't have any of those things. This attitude pisses me off to no end because it forces everyone into the subservient employee rut. I don't trust or want to rely on the government and pensions especially. Higher education and healthcare I like, but at a primary and secondary school level they force you to go to school, but the schooling they provide is not at an acceptable level. I would never pay for it if it wasn't free. Everything in Europe is designed around keeping the wealthy wealthy and the proles under the thumb. It's a dead-end road. I support your right to choose this path, but I don't agree it should come at the expense of the intellectually curious and entrepreneurial types. That's very interesting, and I'm sincerely glad that you're happy. In the US, the value system was, at least, about personal ambition, talent, and action which determine if one should be able to get very rich. There's no shame in wanting to work for a company and focus on a work-life balance. Americans, again traditionally, celebrate those with higher ambitions and achievement. In Silicon Valley and the startup world, many of whom are on HN, the entrepreneur/founder versus employee issue can be very sensitive. You are taking a risk. The risk is that you assume your government will be able to provide you with a comfortable life even when you can no longer work. And when the time comes for your children to get higher education and retire themselves, eventually you hope the government will also be there to step in. It works, until it doesn't. In America you can compensate yourself for this risk by simply getting a job where you are paid a higher salary than the average. Then you don't really care what happens with the social safety net, you've already hedged against it by saving and investing for yourself, and possibly becoming very rich. Personally, I'd be stressed if I were in your position. Government welfare isn't some liquid asset. If you decide you want to go live in some other country with a higher standard of living, such as the United States, is your government going to give you $100,000 or more to go start a life there at the same standard of living you're used to? I doubt it. You'll have to start from scratch, little to no savings, no real credit history, and paying much more for things that were a lot cheaper back in your home country. And if you were to retire in the US, I have a dim view of your future if you have no savings for retirement. If you are already close to retirement and haven't saved anything, you simply will not be able to retire. Basically, you're locked into your home country, and have no realistic options for leaving unless you become richer. If the country goes to shit, so do you. This is not the case somewhere like America, where how well off you are is decoupled from how the country is doing as a whole. Government risk is eliminated, your cash flow and net worth is all that matters. That's much easier to understand and helps you sleep at night. Be careful. We've banned this account for using HN primarily, exclusively. I skimmed your history and didn't see a single exception, for political and ideological battle. It's not what this site is for, and it destroys what it is for, so we ban accounts that do it regardless of which side they're battling for. You've also broken the site guidelines frequently with snark and attacks on other users. Not cool. Major US tech companies earn a profit per employee of $200-400K. That's across every employee, so depending on how you attribute value, the profit per SWE is much higher. That gives a lot of headroom to drive up salaries when competing for hires, and in part sets the market price. I suspect that low European software salaries are just a function of low profitability of European software companies. E.g., Spotify is, at best, around $44,000 per employee, SAP is $41,000. 0. This is the correct answer. To put it another way, US companies are more productive, in the economic sense, than EU companies, and that gap is even wider for tech companies, and those that rely heavily on employing software engineers. Putting aside the question of whether EU companies have higher overhead per employee, probably true on average, they also derive significantly less value from their employees. This is the same effect which explains why the few big tech companies in otherwise low-paying regions will pay above local market rates, for example Shopify, Spotify, etc. My sense is there's a larger US market than a pan-Europe market. If I go from Germany to France to Spain, I'm almost certainly not going to see the same grocery store chains. In the US, there are regional chains, but also a high proportion of homogeneity. In Europe you have strong national and cultural differences that lead to economies more isolated from the whole. In the US, there's regional differences, but I can order at a Starbucks pretty easily in all 50 states without breaking a sweat. Maybe why US brands tend to get big in the US and then export overseas. US has a homogeneous and large market, which brands can make a lot of money in and develop a solid profitable base. That's probably very hard to do in Europe. European employee here, that is indeed correct. It has less to do with the capabilities of the people or the quality, but with the addressed market. I would argue that 90% of my software products are developed by US companies, for example MS Office, Android, iOS, Gmail, with only rare exceptions, e.g. SAP. The US dominates the software market, mostly for historic reasons but also for its unrivaled entrepreneur/VC/risk-taking management style, which sells it products everywhere in the world, earning much more on that way. And the remaining software products in Europe are acquired one by one, for example Skype. Having said all of that, being a software engineer in Europe is a privilege with a good income situation. Keep in mind that those numbers are for the absolute top tech companies even in the US, and by extension, the world. Even in the PPE top 10, the last one Texas Instruments is $40,000 less than the number 5. It would be actually very, very interesting to see the PPE information for a more comprehensive set of companies in the US and EU tech sectors. Or maybe it's me out of the loop and the six-figure salaries are the norm in the US even outside the most profitable companies in the world. Edit. Velp. Of course the data was linked in the article. Just picking companies randomly a little lower from the list, Qualcomm is $118,000, Oracle $81,000, Advanced Micro Devices $30,000. I would love to see some research on the factors that contribute to this. Work culture? Leadership culture? Rigor in interviewing process? Education? There has to be a reason US tech employees are 5x 10x as productive. What are we doing differently? This makes the most sense. Ultimately, an employee cannot have a company paying them more than the value they generate. The value engineers for US companies generate is higher than the value engineers for EU/CAD companies generate, so they have a better bargaining position. This is probably because US companies have a bigger market to start in, and have been more successful at expanding into other markets, including EU and CAD. The profit of tech companies is constrained by size of market addressed, not number of employees they hire. I don't think those numbers are accurate. Google and Facebook both have as many contractors as employees. Greater than, but the company's increasing reliance on temps and contractors has some Google employees wondering if management is undermining its carefully crafted culture. As of March, Google worked with roughly 121,000 temps and contractors around the world, compared with 102,000 full-time employees, according to an internal document obtained by the New York Times. Accounting for those would reduce profit per employee to half. Furthermore, those contractors earn a lot less, further boosting the wages for the full-time employees. Profit per employee is not really meaningful for comparison since very few European companies are pure software, and therefore have cost structures involving much more than salaries. Relatively few employees are software engineers in Volkswagen, Daimler or Siemens, for example. Still huge employers. Silicon Valley/San Francisco etc. was and still is the epicenter of IT. That doesn't tell you at all if Europe companies are low profitable or just average/normal, while no one can just comp with the history of SV/SFR. Europeans seem to think getting by is just fine. They're happy that they're hyper-educated, that their kids are going to be hyper-educated, that their healthcare is paid for, and they get lots of vacation. Because you can't save, you are entirely dependent, in a broader sense, on the government stability. I am not using this sentiment in a pejorative sense like some might. Americans want their fair share of the pie, which will always lead to certain people making more and others making less. Compensation is more than just money to us. It's vacation, stock, better healthcare, expanded education resources and benefits, buying programs, etc. This can be both good and bad. I suspect you can find an endless list of rosy and dark examples to draw from. Most Americans would like to think of themselves as quite independent from the government, whether they want to admit it or not. The value in risk and reward versus security and stability is just different. It's okay that they're different too. Personally, I believe letting people leave the US without monetary penalties so they can pursue cultures that more match their own values is the solution. I once thought that having a system set up so that people could switch places between countries might be beneficial, one that augments the current immigration system. Greater than compensation is more than just money to us. It's vacation, stock, better healthcare, expanded education resources and benefits, buying programs, etc. This can be both good and bad. I don't think this is the right take at all. The way I see it, Americans want to get rich so they have access to the same quality of education, healthcare and leisure time, stability that the average, Western, European has by default. Americans fight for scraps. For instance, look at the list of minimum annual leave by country, 1, or countries by infant and under 5 mortality rate, 2, or education rankings, 3, or countries by traffic-related death rate, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. .org/wiki/list_of_countries_by_traffic are. A larger fraction of Americans have a tertiary degree than almost all European countries. Greater than personally, I believe letting people leave the US without monetary penalties so they can pursue cultures that more match their own values is the solution. There are no monetary penalties unless you are both much wealthier than the average person and have substantial unrealized capital gains. The hard part is finding another country that will take you, not leaving. Because you can't save, sorry, that's nonsense. Tech remains in Europe generally very well paid compared to national averages, albeit just not stratospherically so like some, not even all, US areas/firms. I'm sure there are of course still relatively poorly paid tech roles, but tech Europe-wide simply cannot be characterized as too ill paid to build savings. Greater than because you can't save, you are entirely dependent, in a broader sense, on the government's stability. Do not bet on your money when your government goes down. In the current situation, China raises, switching of Federal Reserves from the dollar to a more diverse bucket, a US capital invaded, the dollar went down from its 100% safety in the 90s to a shaky 90% currently. And that can spiral quickly when something radical happens, like a coup, and the world stops trusting the US. Just saying, I do not trust my bank account. Greater than you can't save, you are entirely dependent, in a broader sense, on the government's stability. I am not using this sentiment in a pejorative sense like some might. I managed to save about Euro 10k/year on a Euro 42k/year salary, and I was being woefully underpaid even by European standards for what I do, but that's a different story. I should have earned at least 60k, but well, which I used to fund my business. Maybe you can save more in the US I don't know, but you can save plenty of money on tech salaries in Europe.
Hey guys, this is the Rogue YouTuber here. I recently had a big change in my life. I had a baby daughter. Here she is. If you could do me a favor and remember to hit the subscribe button and bang the bell, I'm hoping to really create a YouTube channel that really gets people excited and brings people the best, most interesting content collated from across the internet. I'm saving up to save my little girl to Carnegie Mellon Computer Science Department. So please remember to like and subscribe. See you next time.